Alright friends, I have a bit of a confession to make. Since ages, the entire community loves Volt and sings his praises day and night. However, I personally kinda never really vibed with him all that much. But oh boy was I wrong, because not only does he dish out red crits like there's no tomorrow, he's also unkillable and scales perfectly even into the highest levels. So, big shout out to all my generous channel members who helped me keep the lights on, and now, let's talk about it. Alright, you know me, you know my guides, and that means you know we're talking about his skills first, starting out with his passive, which is gonna be a short affair, because his passive is pretty poo-poo. So here's the PNG, let's skip over it and go into the actual skills. See, Volt is a Warframe that is very versatile, but also pretty straightforward with what his skills do. For example, his first skill is called Shock, and that's pretty much exactly what it does. You turn into Sheev Palpatine for a second, shoot your Sith magic at the enemy, and that deals a bit of damage. One thing I should mention though is, Shock has an augment called Shock Trooper, which is very nice because when you equip this one, then you will infuse all your weapons with electric damage. We're gonna use this one in the build, so keep it in mind. Volt's second ability, Speed, and I just gotta say I love how these early Warframes have ability names that are just straight up what the ability does and no fluff around it. So yeah, Volt's Speed, what it does is it increases your speed, you run faster, you reload faster, you melee attack faster, pretty much everything that your body does is faster, except casting speed, but it does not affect stuff like fire rate, for example. Speed also has an augment, which kind of does the same thing as one of those wisp modes, where whenever you get close to an enemy, you zap those enemies automatically with electricity, stunning them for a second, which is kind of nice, but I don't think it's all that important. Skill number 3, Electric Shield, is exactly what you would expect because it is an electric shield. However, in this case, there is quite a bit more to it. First of all, these electric shields do not have an HP count or something. Every damage that is coming in will be blocked off as long as the duration is up, so this one gives you a high amount of protection even in very high levels. Also, you can walk up to the shield, pick it up and carry it around with you. In this state, it will be a bit smaller, however it's still big enough to cover your entire body from frontally incoming damage, which is very nice, especially in smaller corridors. And as if that's not enough, all shots fired through the shield by Volt and his allies gain 50% electricity damage bonus and plus 100% crit damage multiplier. Now, the electricity damage bonus here can be increased by stacking multiple shields on top of each other, however, the crit multiplier is always a fixed plus 100%. Now, I gotta say here, there is a really big wiki entry in the Warframe wiki about this entire skill and all the shenanigans around it, some edge cases here and there, but I'm not gonna go into all those details just yet because I think most of them are not that relevant in day-to-day play. Just note that Volt Shield is the main part of his kit in my opinion because it protects you from all incoming damage no matter how high the enemy level is, and it gives you more crit damage and additional electricity damage bonus. This one also has augments, 2 this time even. One is called Transistor Shield, which in my opinion is not really great, and then we have Recharge Barrier, which might be useful in some cases, however we're not going to use it for today's build, so let's not talk about it. And finally we have Volt's ultimate quote-unquote, which goes by the name Discharge. If you use this skill, you will discharge electric energy in an AoE to all the enemies around you, and those enemies will be stunned with the electrical zap, just like a status effect. However, there will also be chaining lightnings between the enemies. The closer they are together, the more chaining lightnings there will be and the more damage it will deal to each and every one of them. And I gotta say, this skill is exceptionally great for leveling Volt because you can take it into Sanctuary Onslaught, kill a lot of enemies with it, gain all the experience and therefore speed level him, but above level 70-ish, you will see the damage fall off rapidly, especially against armored enemies. Now, Discharge does have an augment which is called Capacitance, and this one is actually pretty interesting because what it does is 3% of the damage that you deal with this skill will be converted into shields for your Volt. And the great thing about this is, this one will always give you the shield. Even if your shield's broke, once this thing does damage, the shields will be up instantly again. However, it should be said that due to the fact that the damage of this ability really isn't high, especially not against armored units, this augment is kind of a mixed bag, and to make it really short, we're not even going to use Discharge in today's build at all, so you don't even have to worry about it. And as always, it would be super duper sugar if you could maybe spare a like, because it will make the algorithm love this video and pump it out to more Tenno out there. So big love for your support, and now let's move on. Now, so much for the skills. But before we jump into the Volt build itself, I want to say that this one is heavily inspired by the recent Siren build that I put out and uses some of the mechanics that I also applied there. So if you've seen that one, then please be so kind and bear with me for a second. Now, what is very important for this build is that we first talk about our weapon selection before we get into the Volt modding itself, because the Volt modding is heavily reliant on those weapons to perform their certain roles. And the first and arguably most important one of these weapons would be the Rakta Dark Dagger, which in my opinion is one of the most fabulous melee weapons ever created, because boy, it is insanely strong, and I'm gonna tell you exactly why. See, the special thing about the Rakta Dark Dagger is that it has a very special ability. Whenever you deal damage to an enemy that is affected by radiation, a portion of that damage will directly be converted into shields for your Warframe. So this means as long as you deal enough continuous damage with the dagger, your shield will constantly refill, and therefore you cannot die, because as we all know, if your shield goes down to 0, then shield gating applies and keeps you invincible for a brief period of time, and if you then recharge the shield in that time frame, you can rinse and repeat the entire process. Now, one very important thing I need to say here, and it's kind of a bit embarrassing that I didn't notice, but in my Siren build I made a critical mistake. Because the build was so incredibly strong, I didn't even notice the fact that the Rakta Dark Dagger does not automatically recharge your shields anymore if your shields are broken. That was an oversight on my part, big apologies for that. However, this is also pretty easy to fix with a mod called Brief Respite that makes, whenever you perform an ability cast, a portion of the energy that you spend on the ability will instantaneously be turned into shields, so you have shields again, and then the dagger's damage will instantly fill those shields up again. And if all of that was a bit quick and a bit much information, then don't worry, let's again go over it step by step on how the Rakta Dark Dagger gives us constant invincibility. As I said, in order to turn damage into shields for us, the enemies need to be affected by radiation. Good thing is, the Rakta Dark Dagger has radiation on it by default. Next, we're going to use a melee arcane called Melee Influence, which makes it that whenever we deal an electricity status effect with our melee weapon, we have a 20% chance to spread all the other status effects applied to the dagger to enemies in a large AoE. That is an amazing tool to spread tons of status effects in the entire room, and we're gonna abuse the living heck out of this. However, we need to be sure that we have electricity on the dagger, otherwise the arcane cannot trigger. And finally, to make sure that we're dealing enough damage with the dagger to pretty much instantly, in the blink of an eye, fill our shields up to the maximum again because we're dealing so much damage, we will go and equip the dagger with gas damage, because the status effect of gas is it creates a static gas cloud that deals damage over time to all the nearby enemies. And also that continuous damage over time from all the gas clouds in the entire room counts as dagger damage and therefore gives us more shields. And even if an enemy hits us so hard that our shield goes down to 0 and this recharge effect gets cancelled, we're gonna have Brief Respite installed on our Vault, so all we need to do is press one ability button, and that little bit of shields that this gives us back will be enough so the chain reaction and all the damage over time that the Dark Dagger does will apply again and pretty much instantly fill our shields up with overshields and all that jazz. But of course, as I said, making us invincible is not the only thing that this cute little dagger can do. The next thing that it's supposed to do is armor strip all the enemies around us, especially those units that cannot be armor stripped with standard abilities or corrosive status effects, like for example Acolytes, which are notorious for getting on our nerves and steal path. See, what we do here is, we equip the Argonac as a weapon because the Argonac has a specific amalgam mod that we can equip onto it, which makes it that if the Argonac with this mod is in our loadout, we don't have to use it, it just needs to be there, then every single hit performed by a dagger type weapon will reduce the enemy armor by a flat amount. Now, the magic here is that, just like with the shield refill, also each and every damage over time tick from those gas clouds that we're dealing counts as one dagger hit, therefore rapidly applying those quote-unquote hits and dwindling down the enemy armor, maybe even in the blink of an eye. Now, you might say, Blacky, that's all nice and well, but I don't want to have the Argonac in my primary weapon slot. I don't want to be limited to just running around with the Dark Dagger all the time. I want to shoot. And I can perfectly understand this, so don't worry, this build will be a build where you can use the Rakta Dark Dagger or you can use a gun. However, since we need the Argonac to enable the armor stripping, we're gonna have to focus on a secondary weapon, which, as we're gonna talk about now, is absolutely no problem because we're gonna choose one that is so incredibly busted, you will never want to use a primary weapon again. By the way, this here would be my build for the Rakta Dark Dagger, and now let's take a look at which gun I'm actually talking about. Now, we just talked about how the Rakta Dark Dagger can armor strip even the toughest foes and at the same time pretty much keep us invincible indefinitely. However, unlike in my recent Seren build, the Rakta Dark Dagger is actually not the main source of damage for this Volt build. No, this crazy red crit stuff that you see in the background, this all goes onto the account of the Dual Toxicist Incarnon, one of the greatest or maybe even the literal greatest secondary weapon in the game when it comes to pure damage output. So let's talk about what makes this one so special and why we need this over anything else with this Volt build, because the synergy here is just absolutely amazing. Now, at base, the Dual Toxicist doesn't look all that special. It's an infested akimbo pistol, so what's the big deal? See, the crazy thing about this is, whenever you achieve a headshot, not a headshot kill, just a headshot, it will reduce its recoil, basically down to 0, it will increase its fire rate, and give itself additional toxin damage at the same time. This is very cool. But it also has an Incarnate form, which turns it into a fully automatic akimbo pistol, putting much more damage downrange. It has tons of status chance, and with the right evolutions, which we're going to take a look at here in a second, you can also go and enhance its crit characteristics so much that you can get all those red crits that you see on screen out of this gun. So let's go over the evolutions. Now, once you activate this gun's Incarnon mode, not only does it turn into a fully automatic gun, but it also gains bullets that ricochet to nearby enemies, effectively dealing AoE damage. Those ricocheting bullets prioritize dealing headshots, which can also trigger this headshot skill that I previously talked about. And if you put more multi-shot on it, then all those multi-shot pellets will also trigger individual ricocheting bullets. And because of exactly that, and because multi-shot is so good on this gun, for Evolution 2, I went for the one that gives us plus 50 damage and more multi-shot, stacking up to 20 times. Evolution 3 doesn't really matter, I went for the less weapon recall, but actually whatever you take here is fine. And in Evolution 4, I went for plus 20% crit chance, which is base crit chance, which is really nice, and that's the base of all those red crits. Now, you might say, that sounds all nice and dandy, right? It's a strong Incarnon weapon, and so is pretty much every other Incarnon in the game. What's the big deal here? See, the big deal here is that this gun gets additional toxin damage when you get a headshot with this effect that I previously mentioned. And also Volt has an augment mod for his first skill, which gives you electricity damage infusion on all your weapons. So if we add 1 and 1 together, that means without adding any elemental mods on the weapon, we get free corrosive damage on this gun. And that's not even where it stops. Because if we were to maybe go and infuse Grendel's Nourish onto Volt, which gives all our weapons additional viral damage, that would mean the Dual Toxicist Incarnon with Volt is one of the very few weapons in the game which can have corrosive and viral on it at the same time. This is absolutely massive, not only because this is one of the strongest elemental combinations that you can possibly have, but also because usually this would take at least 2-3 elemental mods on any weapon. But for the Dual Toxicist Incarnon, you save up all those mod slots and can mod purely into crit, into damage, into multi-shot, all that nice stuff, because you don't need to worry about any elemental modding. All of that comes from the outside through your various skills. This right here would be the build that I'm running, and as you see in the background, this is pretty darn potent. But now, with all of the equipment and the inner workings out of the way, let's take a look at how to mod our Volt himself. I know this might sound weird now, but in order to better understand the Volt build, we first need to take a quick look at which Archon shards I used, because otherwise the Volt build won't make any sense. What I went for here is 2 purple Archon shards with the same effect that Equilibrium does. Even though with the purple shards this effect is much weaker than Equilibrium itself, Since we're gonna use Nourish as a helmet ability, and Nourish massively increases all the energy gain from all sources, these couple percents here are gonna be more than enough for our energy economy. Then, since the Dual Toxicist is gonna be our main source of damage, I went for 2 Tau-Forged Red Shards, which gives us additional secondary weapon crit chance, therefore giving our Dual Toxicist a neat little 75% crit chance bonus. Now, I gotta say here, I know there are technically orange Archon Shards, and orange Archon Shards can get twice the amount of crit chance for secondary weapons. However, those Archon Shards have the restriction that you first need to apply heat to the enemies, otherwise this effect won't trigger. Usually, that wouldn't be a big deal, just prime them with heat and kill them, but with this specific setup, we don't have any chance to put heat either on our weapons or our companion because everything here is so optimized that we unfortunately cannot go and trigger those orange shards, so the red ones will have to do. And finally, I go for 1 Tau-Forged Green one to increase the maximum stacks of corrosive on enemies from 10 to 13, allowing us to reduce enemy armor by 98% with just corrosive alone. Now, you might be wondering, isn't the Rakta Dark Dagger meant to do the armor stripping? Didn't you say that before? And yes, that is technically right. However, I want to give myself the ability here to not rely on the dagger all that much and only really pull it out for armor stripping when the acolytes come that cannot be stripped with corrosive alone. For all the normal enemies, corrosive from the Dual Toxicist is going to be more than enough, and it's way more convenient to play. But alright, so much for the Archon Shards, let's now talk about Volt himself. Since the entire energy economy comes from our purple Archon Shards, we don't need Arcane Energize, we don't need Equilibrium, and we don't even need a Flow mod because I'm playing Volt Prime and he has enough base energy to begin with. So our 2 Arcane slots are going to be purely focused on buffing up our weapons, with Arcane Velocity giving a massive fire rate buff to the Dual Toxicist, as well as Arcane Avenger giving us a flat final plus 45% crit chance. In the aura, unfortunately, we don't have any options. We need to go with Brief Respite because we need this to give us a little bit of shields so that the shield regeneration from the Dark Dagger can't kick in again after our shields break. Prime Sure-Footed so we can't get knocked down. And the rest of the build basically focuses on as much duration as possible so we don't have to refresh our buffs all that much. Prime Continuity, Narrow-Minded, Constitution, and Augur Message, getting our duration to over 300%. Shock Trooper, because we need the Electro Infusion on our Dual Toxicist to form corrosive, as well as on the Dark Dagger, because remember, we need to deal melee electricity status effects in order to trigger the spread from melee influence. Prime Redirection for more shields, meaning more survivability as well as longer shield gating duration. Precision Intensify, because we take the 4th skill and replace it with Grendel's Nourish, and we want to have specifically Grendel's Nourish be much stronger than all the rest. As well as Stretch, so the viral explosions from Nourish have a bit more range to tackle enemies. Now, one thing I should specify here is Precision Intensify. See, the thing is, for this build, it is extremely important that we don't go much over 100% strength. The reason for that is, we do need the Rakta Dark Dagger to spread all its status effects to allow us to have the constant shield recharge. Problem here is, with too much ability strength, the viral as well as the electricity bonus from Grendel's Nourish and Shock Trooper will get so high that the radiation as well as the gas portion of the damage on the dagger will go way down in proc priority, and since we need the gas to deal the damage over time and we need the radiation to be on the enemies in the first place, it is crucially important that all the different damage types that are on the dagger somewhat have the same weight. And with over 100% ability strength, this is not going to happen and you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. But even though we're done with the Volt build now, please do not click away just yet because there's one more crucial element to this entire setup that is very important and that I want to talk about right now. This one would be our companion coming in the form of Worm Prime. Unfortunately, in order to get the maximum effect out of it, yes, you have to get the Prime version, the normal won't do. So if you don't have the Prime version of Worm, I would recommend using Diriga instead. Okay, so why do we need Worm Prime? Worm Prime is the only Sentinel in the game that, if you install Calculated Redirection, has more than 1200 shields. With the mod Reinforced Bond, if you have more than 1200 shields, you gain plus 60% fire rate to your weapons, which is nice because we want to have more fire rate on our Dual Toxicist. In addition, we have standard stuff here, like Guardian for example, refilling our shields to the maximum once they go down to 0 to give us a nice little additional safety net, Synth Deconstruct so that we get the health drops that we can convert into energy with the purple Archon shards, and, what is very important, Duplex Bond in combination with Assault mode. What Duplex Bond does is, whenever you spend 100 energy, your companion will create a clone of itself and then that clone goes and attacks enemies. You can have up to 3 of those clones on the field at any given time. Now, you would be asking, why do you want Diriga to attack the enemies? Isn't that kind of pointless? Aren't Sentinels kind of super weak? And yes, they are, however, they can provide a whole lot of support in this way. What I did here is, I equipped Worm Prime with the Verglass as a weapon. The Verglass is a high status chance cryo beam weapon with a high fire rate. Then I modded that for even more status chance and even more fire rate, and most importantly, I put the mod Shivering Contagion on it, which spreads cold status effects to nearby enemies whenever the weapon deals a cold status effect itself. In other words, with the main worm on the field dealing cold damage to an enemy, plus 3 clones being on the field dealing cold damage to various enemies, and those cold status effects spreading to nearby enemies whenever one is dealt, pretty much all the enemies in the entire room are going to be constantly frozen. This is very great because frozen enemies cannot attack you, but at the same time, and this is more important, frozen enemies take more crit damage. And as you should know by now, we are dealing massive crits, so that is a win-win situation. In this video, I borrowed quite some ideas from my recent OP Seren build. So if you like this one, then definitely also check out that one right now. Another big shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Cell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nostlinux Gaming, Lycan Shepherd, Turtlepeer, Pepperwolf, Ondakanio2, Miss Faraday X, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.